About the recording, and Mark, you have the floor.
Well, welcome to Lit Balm, everybody. Today is episode 49 of Lit Balm since the pandemic hit us. That is quite an achievement, I think. And we are going strong still. Today we have an amazing reading, Rooms and Spaces, with readers from across the globe. We have Holly Iglesias, who's tuning in from Florida, Rodger Kamenetz, who's tuning in from New Orleans, Paul Hetherington from Canberra, Australia, and Jane Monson from Cambridge, England. So welcome, everybody. And it's going to be a fantastic show, but let me just tell you a few things about what's coming up as well. On March 27, we have Lynn Hegenian, Jeff Friedman, Lynn Andrews, and Jelena Orlovsky. On April 10, we have a Singapore-connected authors read, which includes Rachel Blau-Duplessis, Marilyn Tan, George Sitches, and Ranjit Hoskote with guest MC Alvin Pang from Singapore. April 17, we have Dominican poets, including Rina Espaillat, Jose Enrique Del Monte, Soledad Alvarez, and Juan Matos, with guest MC Susan Dickey, who will also be acting translator for several of them. At April 24, we have The Magic Show, which includes Dorianne Lowe, Andrew Geron, Bruce Bond, Hank Laser, and Ruth Lepson. And well, I'm going to hand it back over to my co-host Cassandra.
Yeah, welcome to Rooms and Spaces. I love the fact that we have people who are amazing prose poets. Some of them write other things as well, and some of them are only prose poets devoted entirely to that beautiful box on the page. So what we generally do with Lit Balm is we introduce the co-hosts, and the co-hosts read a poem, and then we get into our feature. So you've just heard the brilliant Mark Vincennes talking, and I'd like to introduce him and ask him to read us a poem. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss American poet, a fiction writer, a translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He's published 14 books of poetry, including more recently, Becoming the Sound of Bees, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, and Here Comes the Night Dust. Vincennes' newest collection, The Little Book of Earthly Desires, and a novel set in ancient China, Three Taos of Tao, or How to Catch a Fortuitous Elephant, are both forthcoming from 2021 from Spite and Dival. An album of music, ambience, and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is also forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Vincennes is an incredible and prolific translator. He's translated from German, Romanian, and French. He's published 10 books of translations, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Mertz with White Pine, and it was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. His translation of Klaus Mertz's selected poems, An Audible Blue, is forthcoming from White Pine Press. His poems have been published in the greatest journals, including The Nation, Ploughshares, the Los Angeles Review, World Literature Today, Raritan, Asymptote, Plume, and later this year, Westerly. His work has received fellowships and grants from the Swiss Arts Council, from the Literary Colloquium Berlin, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Witter Brinner Foundation for Poetry. Vincennes is editor and publisher of the glorious Mad Hat Press and publisher of New American Writing. He's lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born in Matilda Hospital on the Peak in Hong Kong, but he now lives on a farm in rural western Massachusetts, overlooking Herman Melville's Greylock Mountain. And for the regulars who always love the last line of his bio, this week we have Where There Are More Opossums, Fireflies, and White-tailed Deer Than People. So Mark, please give us a poem.
I will. In fact, I'm going to give you two short ones. This one's called Amorous Songs to the Universe. Absence and presence, as written in the Tao Te Ching, is like foresight and hindsight. What lies in between but dark matter? Another way of looking at this is, who resides in the mirror but you? All the bureaucrats are sipping ouzo in the Café Royal after midnight. It seems The Greeks knew a thing or two. Lemon and garlic are the perfect pairing to bring out the flavor of any meat or bean, the perfect pairing to cleave dusk to dawn. By this time, the tables were full of foot-stomping song, and at that critical moment after a Davidoff more or two, something became clear, an epiphany, a liturgy. The question wasn't whose home to awaken in. Given all this time meditating on the question, you had to know where the answer was coming from. God singing into the cosmos. It was at the Kaiser Bar on Hauptallee, behind that Rathaus, where crows gathered in the dawn to fight over the remnants of a mouse, where during the day the children dragged their tubas, their bassoons, their xylophone mallets, and their flugelhorns to practice "The Good Lord is Within Us." And what I am given to understand he was, the cosmos itself, or themselves, is continuously tumbling through its transformations. I should know this better than most. The Undertaker. Autumn eats out of her orchards. A carp's eye appears at the surface of the lake. The fountains are still, baked bread in the air. There was a moment when I wanted to pull my hair out, but then I realized it's all gone, like the death of Osiris and all those dreams of wilded plains rich in insects and hares. If someone has something to say, simply say it. There are few words at all, if any, at a time like this. As it turns out, you're always opening the door and letting what is in out. The fair hair of the woman in the pinstripe suit caught the light, and then it stayed there. And now I'm going to introduce my co-host and co-founder of Lit Balm, Jonathan Penton, who also founded unlikelystories.org, an electronic journal of literature and art, in 1998. He's lent editorial and management assistance to many literary and artistic ventures, including Mad Hat, the New Orleans Poetry Festival, by the way of which several Lit Balm readings are going to be featured in the month of April. Rigorous, another journal for folks of color, and Big Bridge. In 2005, he founded Unlikely Books, which publishes 3 to 5 books of poetry a year. He's organized literary performances and performed himself across the United States, I think pretty much every state. And his poetry books are Last Chap from Virgin Press, Blood and Salsa, and Painting Rust, and Prosthetic Gods, and more recently, Standards of Acidity from Litfest Press in 2016, and the free eChat backstories, which you can download from Archivist ebooks. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Mark. So most weeks, because I'm not very prolific, I read something the way you're publishing in Unlikely Stories or Unlikely Books. And this week, just to cause trouble, I'm going to read my own poem, Shocking the Regulars. This is called All Children Are Born Knowing Astrology. I built a goblet. I took an automotive funnel and propped it in a cream pitcher. I superglued them together and wrapped them in modeling clay. I painted the whole thing golden and chugged box wine from it. I always offered her some. I made a pipe that looked like a scepter. I took a paper towel tube and carefully secured a plastic bong into one end with lots of tape and a bit of glue. I sawed off the end of a toy plastic trumpet and glued the bell to the other end of the tube to create a face-sized mouthpiece, then painted it golden. I had to use an outdoor lighter to keep it going, but I did. I offered my skunkweed freely. I built a fantastic crown of cupcakes, chocolate shell, and red icing. I wore it for a day or two, then carefully lifted it off my head and placed it on hers. I found a piece of local art in a lighting store. It was paper mache over a wire frame. It was nominally a lamp, with one 25-watt bulb inside it and a cheap fixture with a switch on the cord. It was in the shape of a fish and cost $300. People thought I paid too much for it, but I didn't care. It had, "If pain persists, get back in the water," emblazoned across it. I gave it to her and grinned and grinned. All right. And next up is our host for this show, who will be introducing the features to you, the wonderful Cassandra Atherton, our co-host. Cassandra is an award-winning writer, scholar of prose poetry, and professor of writing and literature in Melbourne. Her most recent books of prose poetry are Pre-Raphaelite, Leftovers, and Fugitive Letters. She is currently writing a book of prose poetry on the atomic bomb with funding from the Australia Council. I read it, it's wonderful. Cassandra co-wrote Prose Poetry, An Introduction, and the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry, and hasn't sent me a copy of either. She is commissioning editor for Westerly Magazine. Cassandra, will you read us a poem today?
Yes, Jonathan, and I will get to the Australia Post on Monday as soon as it opens. Yes, I'm going to read you a piece that was published in Island magazine called Distorted Depiction. And it's in two parts, and they're like two mini prose poems that join together. 1. Picasso says love is dangerous, like a house that's falling down. You trace the heart shape around my hairline, fingers coming to rest under my pointed chin. Widow's peak, I say, but you kiss the word away, your hands cupping my buttocks as we stumble towards the bed. Paintings line the walls, and I wonder what is hidden under the rich Venetian red that defines their perimeter. I think about clawing at their frames as you raise me to the ground. 2. His poems are full of memories bordered in white and blue, of unlined paper and cobalt ink. I think of the spode dinnerware in your kitchen, the way the bowls sit inside one another and jiggle when you roll the drawer in and out. Like Marie-Therese Walter, I am soft and sleepy. I swim yellow-green. I remember your palms on my buttocks, curve inside curve, the cupping of flesh. At the perimeter of memory is the long quiver that traveled the length of my spine. It masks the wordlessness beyond the flesh. So today, I cannot wait to introduce these people because not only are they amazing poets and amazing scholars, I read 3 of their amazing books, but I've also got a new brilliant friend called Rodger, and he's also a prose poet who wrote an incredibly famous book that we studied at university called The Dew in the Lotus. But I will introduce him properly, and then he is going to read some of his amazing work. Rodger Kamenetz has published 8 books of poetry. His most recent books of prose poems are Yonder with Lavender Ink and Dream Logic with PURH. He is founder of Natural Dreamwork and leads a group of 18 practitioners worldwide. He won the National Jewish Book Award in Jewish Thought and is the author of, as I said, the amazing The Dew in the Lotus in 1994 and The History of Last Night's Dream in 2007. He's actually doing a reading with Rodrigo Toscano and Kit Robinson on March 24, and I will put the link in the chat so that you can join him. But please give a hearty welcome to Rodger, who is going to read for us first today. Welcome, Rodger.
Thank you. I had no idea, but first is good. Hello to everybody out there, and I want to thank Cassandra and Mark and Jonathan and everyone else involved with making this all possible. It's an amazing record you guys have put together, and 49 readings. That's really awesome. So that's wonderful. Congratulations. I think you really stood up to the pandemic and beat it down. So I'm going to read from Dream Logic, and I'm sort of going to move backwards through the book and read a few poems, and hope that works out. So the first poem is called Underfoot, and I don't know that any of these poems are about anything, but I would say that at least there's a feature of moss in this poem. I've really gotten interested in moss and lichens, especially lichens. I haven't written my lichen poem yet, but maybe I will. But here's a moss poem. Underfoot. Do you think moss has a purpose in life, or whistles in the dark like the rest of us? When we are gone, it will still be here, covering earth, covering sticks, anything like a path it will cover, bluish, sea green. It goes in for quiet colors, but nothing sanctimonious. Even its smoky gray seems to hold the light close. Another time. What moss does to light would make for a new physics. The sun would agree if it weren't so busy illuminating itself. The sun is more human-like than moss and could become a god any day. So the next poem, gee, it's not here. Well, I thought I'd be clever and read it off the screen, but it seems to be in my book. So I'll read it from the book. And it's called The Revenant, which is, I think, a word for for what returns. If I come to you in a dream, will you still recognize me? I may be the little dog yapping underfoot to test your annoyance. Or I may be an ocean without water or salt, so you might swim in me in longing. In this life, I may often be invisible to you, the weight of a shadow on the ground. Feel me with your thoughts. They are small wooden hammers covered in felt. You can hear notes in your sleep. Alone, I'm a minor key. When the kiss of the hammer skips a beat, the stretched string mourns in its pegs. I am just the other side of all music, like a song maiden behind a screen of willows. I was going to explain that the word song there refers to the Song Dynasty, but I forgot to explain it, but it doesn't matter, I guess. I'd like to read this poem. I think prose poetry has so many wonderful possibilities. Sometimes prose poetry can just be, for me, movement of images, movement of feeling. Sometimes it has more the aspect of a parable. I mean, I don't know. What's great about prose poetry is nobody really knows what it is, except for Cassandra, since she did an anthology, but I mean, nobody else does. So that's great. I love that. And long may it continue to be totally undefinable. But this poem maybe falls more into a certain form. The Door Prize. The prize for doors was given at a single window. We had to stand in long lines that stretched back into hillsides for days, but we were polite as citizens and quiet, like tufts of grass. In our minds, we were going to get the door that fit our house. Then we would go out and find the house waiting for us in a lonely country. We would someday find the man or woman with the matching door, the back to our front, the front to our back. Until then, we would lie on the door, sleeping near drains. When the wind came, we would shiver a little. When the sun came, we would bake on the wood grain. We would cover the door with our bodies to protect against rain. Citizens of Earth, like ants or forest creatures, our loneliness was a guarantee against impossible wishes. We kept opening our doors onto empty air, surprised how the world turned upon hinges. We looked at stars through cracks in the door. The world would open someday for us. There must be a meaning to all this suffering, the Book of Suffering said, if we could find it in the public library. There was a public library. Strangely, it had no doors. There was no way in, and we circled it, hungry for the book, hungry for the poem to recite by heart, hungry in heart. So I wrote a poem in which I address Homer. I don't know, I hadn't seen that done lately, so I thought it was okay to try. And so I guess in this poem, since you don't see it on the page, but the basic idea is that one of the speakers is allegedly me and the other speaker is allegedly Homer. So we'll see how that works out. I think you'll agree that Homer sounds just like Homer. Okay, let me scroll down and find it. Here we go. All right. I'll just read it from the book. Okay. Homer and Penelope. Master, I wrote a poem, a love poem, and now I'm in love. Homer nodded, a vast silence that held the idea of space. Master, how do I find the words? The landscape spread below us, a peopled valley streamed from a hidden center in each person's chest. Then the rays joined together as a second sun, a vanishing point where all light returns together until it can, where all light returns until it can come again. Yet each and all go about their day, connecting only sparsely. That was the tragedy of the lack of vision that leads to war. Blind Homer knew all about it. People stumbled past each other in the daylight dark, but a little girl lit a candle in the name of love, and all the names were lit by it, even death. She turned to me with a diamond eye. The word she spoke then, I am still trying to remember. It was the perfect word all poets seek, the perfect rhyme. Instead of Homer, I now longed for Penelope, for home. I wrote the following poem, Cartouche. Of course, I'm thinking of a cartouche, you know, the little frame around things. And I wrote the poem for Mary Ruefle, who I don't know. I like her work, and I don't even know how to pronounce her name, but I think it's Ruefle. Although it sounds like Ruefle, but that's interesting. So it's called Cartouche. We speak of facts of the imagination. These are facts our thoughts create. If you lift the tiny horse and look under its barrel, you will see made in dream, neatly stamped in block letters surrounded by an oval, never a square. Beware of false images. But if you lift the miniature horse to your ear, you will hear the tiny gears of locomotion whirring. While you slept, those wheels were confected from digested butter. This is the truth, as true as any other. You can tell it's the truth because it's surrounded by an oval, never a square. Over the bright plain, grass as tall as men sway like a chorus of flags. The sun gallops away, beating its hooves. There is no proof. The air is just blue, that's all. The sky grows dark in the blue. At the bottom of a cup you can never fill. And I want to end with two, I always hate it when people say, I'm going to end with 55 more poems. I'm going to end with two poems. I think they're relatively short, and I want to leave room for everyone else. But they both are the subject of increasing disinterest, identity, at least to me. But everybody else is taking up the slack, so I think that's okay. So the first one is called I and We. I could never have abandoned you if I hadn't abandoned myself. The space I was looking into was like the ringing of a bell, and the sounds got lost in me. In that world, there was only one word, stop, and it couldn't be spoken. Motion was the only grammar, vectors at my heels like the wings of Mercury, but I was the message I had to deliver, sent by a deaf god with manners of thunder. But you were always my destination, unknown, unknowable, another. Give me your lips, I cried, bursting on the scene, that I might speak. Give me your fingers that I might touch, you said, and I did. Together, I arrived. And I'll end with this one, which actually came after the other. So it's called And I. I no longer know what I means. I no longer know what I mean. The pretense of a blossom, a root in uncertainty. My favorite word, darkness. My favorite word, lightning. Am I making a list of words to build a world, or am I surveying wreckage? Either way, I am surviving. Water to the roots. I will worship the sun. My religion is a custom around here, like politeness. I is a custom, a neighborly politics. The seed, tamped down, sprouts. Bury me, I breathe underneath. Hear me out, I will flower in your ear. Okay, thank you all very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I would have been very happy for you to end with 55 poems because I think they were really fabulous. Thank you for kicking us off. It's a great way to start. And next up we have Heavenly Holly Iglesias, who is the author of 3 collections of divine poetry, Sleeping Things, Angles of Approach, and Souvenirs of a Shrunken World, and a trailblazing, mind-blowing critical work called Boxing Inside the Box, Women's Prose Poetry. I can recommend it. She has an extraordinary mind. She has been awarded fellowships by the National Endowment for the Arts, the North Carolina Arts Council, the Edward Albee Foundation, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Her current project is an intergenerational memoir in prose fragments with the working title Theories of Flight. So Holly, please read for us. Please take us into your extraordinary world.
Wow, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to Lit Balm, especially on number 49, which is the year I was born. So I like that coincidence. And I'm really happy to be here with Jane and Rodger and Paul, and also have your book, Cassandra and Paul, which is on the bookshelf behind me, that fantastic prose poetry and introduction, magnificent work. I really liked the theme. It helped me just select things. So I've got a few poems. The first one moves from a museum gallery to a room in an asylum. And it came from an exhibit I saw in Western Massachusetts of suitcases that were taken out of an asylum that was closed. And it was the suitcases that people were admitted with at the beginning of the 20th century. So the title of the poem is Conceptual Art. An act of recovery, they call it. Curators rooting through the baggage of inmates deposited long ago for safekeeping, hungry for narratives free of consequence. In his small strapped case, the single starched shirt, his winter drawers, a geography text once memorized, to win the ribbon mother tacked to the parlor wall, boasting of her genius boy, before he began drooling in church, tweezing the hairs from his forearm, singing to himself as he walked to the foundry after a breakfast of oats and beans and splashing his cheeks with her cologne, before he started seeing things that weren't there, and begged her for stories in Polish to soothe his fears, his grief for uncles buried in an old world, and the name no one in town could pronounce. He lived out the balance of his days in gray pants and black shoes, took meals at 6, 12, and 6, and dug graves when told to. His single pleasure, if you dare call it that school book. A quiet, solid thing upon his lap. Each afternoon, his fingers, smooth as the pages, patting it, stroking it, calming the tempest between its covers. This one takes place in New Orleans because that's where Cassandra and I were going to meet each other if the Poetry Festival in New Orleans, oh, please God, one year it will happen live again. Yeah. And it takes place in a pretty dilapidated apartment building that used to be a single residence in the Garden District. Annunciation Street. The house lists a steamboat beached in the Garden District, laden with cargo from other worlds, sugar, pestilence, the currency of flesh. Her eyes lock onto the back of a sleeping head as she bolts for the door, past the bed, the table, the evidence upon it. Streetcar token, a pack of cools, a broken cup. But this is not the set of a movie so much as its plot. She descends the stairs, angles across the chipped white face of decay, each step a departure as dawn drains of color like a body new to sex. This one takes place in an outdoor cafe in Madrid, where I went a few years ago with my son and his family for his 40th birthday. And it had been almost 40 years since I lived in Spain as a person married to a draft dodger during the Vietnam War. And Franco was alive, and my dad said, "So you're going to the last fascist country in the world to protest your government? What were you thinking?" Anyway, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Plaza San Miguel. Across the way, my past sips coffee, her cup like mine steaming. She is dressed as the girl in Bob Dylan's song Who Never Stumbles, who's got no place to fall. And I'm playing the lady in a camel hair coat and a red pashmina that would have made my mother proud. We sit silent as the Spanish of Spaniards fills the square, as she jots in a notebook a beggar's plea, the whisper of lovers. I wish she would look up and see me, but there is no comforting her now, far from home, convinced that exile is an act of will, something to hone the dull contours of youth. This is another thinking about movies poem. That's the opening frame. It's this, I come from the Midwest, which is always called the middle of nowhere, which is highly irksome. But there does seem to be something about dread that abides in the middle of nowhere. So this is the opening scene of, well, it's the set. It's a porch on a farmhouse in Kansas in cold blood. Middle of nowhere. The idea of Kansas fills the screen. November, windbreak of trees, a foil to the city without which there is no heartland, no horror. We scan the fields until the camera sets a building in its sights, walks us toward it to show the clean lines, the white solidity of a farmhouse through blades of wheat. We hear an impossible rustle, want to muffle it, for silence is essential to the notion of prairie. Were there a scarecrow or stalks of corn, we could not be more certain that we had arrived at the great middle, the plain, awful core of it all, or that we are about to happen upon stains, small pools of extinguished life darkening the floorboards. This next poem is takes place on a cabin on an island in Wisconsin, and it's picturing Laureen Niedecker, who she is the source. Her poem Foreclosure is the source of the epigraph. Leave me, and the epigraph is, may prose and property both die out, and leave me peace. Picture her in a hat that once had a bit of flair, but that was long ago. So picture her now. Laureen, ever spare, ever wary, tramping through reeds, through muck, in rubber boots and a bulky coat, faded plaid, probably a man's coat, but she's a woman in it, a woman of hard hungers and ideas honed like a felling axe. Upper Midwest, Lake Country, town where the post office matters as much as the bank. Sorry, I lost my place. But with Laureen, it's her house that matters, just a cabin really, but hers in a way that says, I don't give a good goddamn about hanging wallpaper or anything other than reading and writing. Lorene, alone indoors and out, not much company but the typewriter, her keen eye on the neighbor screwing the lid of a popcorn can over a hole in his wall so the wind won't mouse in, which is what Lorene does. She lays down lines, this time 8 of them, tight and tidy on the page, then looks away, maybe through the back window, the one by the pump, before raising it a crack, letting the grief out and letting the mouse back in. And these last two, this next one is about closets and cupboards and small spaces, as well as empty houses when you move. Set store by your trifles. I ransacked the crannies of my childhood, cupboards, linen closets, desk drawers, toolboxes, duffel bags, medicine chests, lockers, pantries, to gather whatnots and doodads for comfort in some unforeseen future. Many moves by now have winnowed the loot, each abandoned house now recalled simply by what was left at the curb or flung into the sea. Warped rackets, wedding rings, baby teeth. What little remains fits in a box, a candy box my father gave my mother as consolation for their time apart. The box that once emptied, she stashed in her lingerie drawer. Inside it, the hankies her aunts had embroidered, holy cards of Saint Teresa and Saint Anthony, and her half of a heart-shaped pendant worn on a thin chain until the day he came home from the war. And then the last one takes place in the parlor, and that's the title, Parlor. This American life contains no meadow, no pony, no point of view, just bureaus stripped of all but the basics. The safety pins, smelling salts, violet pastilles, all the random whatnots skittering in the recesses of a drawer with each push and pull. Perhaps what is really called for is a yard of fine linen, the heavy satin stitch of a monogram, something soft like a damper. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much. I told you she was amazing. Join me in becoming a Google stalker of all of her poetry readings. It's well worth it. Thank you so much, Holly. Next, we have Paul Hetherington, who is a distinguished Australian poet who has published 15 full-length books of poetry and prose poetry and a verse novel. Recent books include the prose poetry collection Typewriter and Manuscript, and the co-authored epistolary prose poetry sequence that I'm quite familiar with, Fugitive Letters, which I believe we did together. He has also published 11 poetry books, chapbooks. He's won or been nominated for more than 30 national and international awards and competitions, including the 2014 Western Australian Premier's Book Awards for the best poetry book published in Australia that year. He was awarded one of 2 places on the 2012 Australian Poetry Tour of Ireland. Paul also undertook an Australia Council residency at the BR Whiting Studio in Rome in 2016. He is Professor of Writing in the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra. He's head of the International Poetry Studies Institute, otherwise known affectionately as IPSI, and joint founding editor of the international online journal Axon Creative Explorations. He founded the International Prose Poetry Group in 2014, and with yours truly, scrumptious, chitty chitty bang bang reference, he is co-author of Prose Poetry and Introduction, which Holly plugged so beautifully for us, and co-editor of the Anthology of Australian Prose Poetry with Melbourne University Press. And I have to say nice things about him because he's a pretty special co-author. So Paul, will you please read for us?
Yes, thank you very much, Cassandra, and thanks very much to everyone at Lit Balm. It's wonderful to be part of this and also to be reading with such wonderful writers. So I'm going to just start with a poem called What Was Left, and these are all prose poems that I'll be reading today. Can everyone hear me reasonably well? Great. What was left? A towel and bathing cap remained, and a tattered copy of a novel, The Red Room. They belonged to 13-year-old Lena, his Swiss pen pal, who stayed for 5 weeks during a ferocious summer. Nearly every day, his parents took them all to the beach, his sisters, friends, the next door neighbours' kids, where they ate canned beans on balmy evenings. An uncle took them to a riverfront resort. They played table tennis and quoits, swam in a long blue pool. 12 years old, he felt shy, while his sisters kept company with their dolls. Lena made friends with older boys. Twice his uncle brought her back to the resort, but negligently, as if enjoying her truancy. On the last night, someone saw her in a dinghy near the falls. Rescued, half undressed, she left the next day. His mother would not speak to his uncle. The novel lay for months in the spare bedroom like a remonstration. The next piece I'd like to read is called Eggs. He took 2 eggs from her hands and broke them carefully into a white bowl. A yolk held against its side like an unsteady mountain climber. He thought of her hands on the ledge, how he'd grasped her, how she didn't slide. For 7 years, he'd kept the image, and as he beat the eggs with a fork, he asked whether she also wanted tea. Just the omelette, she said. He wondered what ropes and hooks of words kept them here, recalling that long white vista, her trembling hands, his slipping hold on a future. And I've written recently a prose poem, which is in response to a neuroimage, an image of the human mind, which somebody sent me. And it's called The Flight of Bats. Thought swerves through images as a bat accelerates through air. You stand in memory, your dripping shirt brown from dirty river water, air and sunshine colliding, a smile lifting your mouth. I'd hold you as I did when you spoke of thought as knotted and tangled thread, when our love was umber, arms linking shadowed synapses with nerve and world. Our tensed bodies were skin listening antenna, and as swarming feeling dragged us into air, night had the color of dark words. I'm there, you said, sensation expanding like the sudden flight of bats, sending ultrasound, tonguing and hearing, sensing gardens and movement, finding in echolocation the fetching shapes of night and body. Now, following Holly's example, I'd like to read a few ekphrastic works. When I was in Rome in 2015 and 16, where I was able to stay for 6 months, which was absolutely wonderful, courtesy of the Australia Council, I was kind of working on a project around paintings in Rome and a few other bits and pieces. And I ended up, after I left, writing a book in which I imagine walking through a gallery in Rome. The gallery is a fiction, I made it up through writing the book, but it does include references to various actual paintings, not only paintings in Rome, but paintings in other parts of the world. It's a complete book, so the idea is you just sort of walk through the gallery as you read the book. And it's a sort of reflection, I guess, on our relation to art and other forms of representation. So these poems are from the middle of the work, and this one's called History. An aqueduct strides across the landscape in broken steps, and the train rocks. History catches you. Old bricks lean towards the carriage. Water reaches from a damaged channel like a multi-armed god. You see yellow and green light, a stretching meadow, a few scrappy trees. Earth tips from an exposed bank, and a man lays his jacket on a broken arcade. A tunnel swallows you like piped water. This one is called Ninth Room Perambulation. So we're in the ninth room of the gallery. And the reference to the Tiber or the Tiber River obviously puts it in Rome. And the blue of the Virgin's grief references the use of very expensive pigments to depict the Virgin's clothing in a lot of the paintings from the Renaissance and earlier. Ninth room perambulation. I'm standing quietly and a painting speaks of how there were floods for nearly a week, and not far from here, the Tiber rose. But after all, a tour's arrived and a guide's instructing her group. It's neat how he's painted her feet. They move on and I examine again the Virgin with crucified child. Desert sun bakes the blue of her grief. It's almost all she knows. And grace she carries, divinity that dies, the world's long heaviness. She'd hold him forever if time would stand still. She'd let him go if she could. And I'll just read one more from this, and this is called Eighth Room, Special Exhibition of Dutch Paintings. When you stumble on flagstones, I seize your arm. We climb marble steps, feeling their old weight in our legs. As we enter, there are 100 crowded Dutch paintings showing 17th century fruit and meat. The ticket sellers playing Bach's inimitable cello suites, but the sound so low, I query what it is. The Largo speaks of Spain, where we listened and were entranced, where we sat on a balcony as you offered counsel. I'm reminded that affections, often like this, a helping hand, music no one expects. Someone says right words, and the aftermath enthralls, like a painting one could eat. I've got a poem I'm reading partly because Cassandra's co-host today, and this is a three-part prose poem, and it's dedicated to her because when we started writing the book on prose poetry, well, what became the book on prose poetry, it was a big research project that we started that included creative work, and this was a kind of acknowledgement of some of our early collaborative efforts. So, Cassandra, here we go. It's called Rooms. 1. When you are in the desert and undulations of dunes slide toward you, you may remember a room. Under shiny stars, in the cold sweep of night, you'll hold that room close. And in blade-like morning, when light strikes the ground like scattered gemstones, you may stare at distance and know that room as if it were in your body, a place in which you're strong, no matter how small its dimensions. It is like a skin that knows the flow of your blood. It's where you discovered the value of limitation. 2. Sometimes it contains a staircase. At other times it's small and spare, smelling of plum cake and tart kumquat liqueur spilled on linoleum. Occasionally, it has ornate furniture and colourful half-pulled drapes. A boy hides behind a chest. A girl rubs a dress's green satin between fingers. A dog pants, a bath runs nearby. The girl stands on tiptoe, looking through a cobwebbed window. Later, the boy sucks the inside of her thigh and she holds onto his hair. Sometimes, the room is elongated high in a building. There are dark floorboards. Light squeezes through shutters. 3. Rooms are informed by what's no longer there. light that wonders at you lying in a cot, space circling dark, drowning, walls like an unfixed firmament of mind. You grow up and forget those rooms, but they cling, become stairs without end, an intimate boudoir of dreaming, a lit mystery behind doors, always old-fashioned, as if belonging to a different century. They are like early touch, haunting every exploration. I'm just going to finish by reading two poems from a book, Palace of Memory, which is a kind of elegy, extended elegy to my father, who died a few years ago at the age of 92. And it's hard to characterize this work as a whole, but I guess it dwells on the unreliability and the evocative mysteries and enigmas that I think characterize memory and our sense of who we are. So this is number 52 from the sequence. Gates and alleys of the mind are open. In this dusk, silence holds the moon as if it's a chunk of something broken. It might be love with its weedy laneways. One wind boisterous day, we looked for wild plants and found words beneath the soil or crouching under leaning struts of mushrooms. I can't find them now. They sung in ways that addressed our lack and loss. Today my father walks across the bricks he long since laid, as if another time creeps through the brown-hued air, and his utterance precedes him, an old and well-told joke from his time at war, dying at the sight of falling bombs. The moon's ray is a Renaissance sword, and his second afterlife runs me through. And I'm going to finish with number 66, which is getting towards the end of the sequence. And it's in 4 short parts, but I'll just read them through. And I should say this whole work refers to Tristram Shandy, and so therefore it's got all sorts of reflections about time, clocks, and fathers, and even Hamlet. The clock doesn't wind, though the ratchets seem to turn. The hands stay where they are so many years ago. The mechanism is obdurate. Years fall on the face like a dry waterfall. Cascading with images, ticking through episodes. If there are 3 drops of oil to be got and a hammer to be found. I walk on a plank in memory and a creek runs under me. I hesitate, seeing the froth and curl of water. The branches that dam the flow are being overturned. My image dives. A swell has hold of us. The tide's drag has hold. My uncle flails in the ocean, painting, "Can you get to shore?" My heart's a rapid metronome, my thoughts are torn. I nod yes, arm over arm, barely moving. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was really marvelous reading. We have a joke in Australia that PH always mentions his time in Rome every time he does a poetry reading. But I don't mind that because I do love those poems that he wrote called The Gallery of Antique Art. And I'm famously known for having talked about it and said that I Googled it because it was so real. I actually was convinced there was a place. So I think that's a testament to his writing. So thank you. Next we have Jubilant Jane Monson. Sorry, Jane, there's not many good J words, but I tried. It's coming up for 11 p.m. there. So I feel this is the last burst before you get some sleep, Jane. Jane lives in Cambridge as an independent scholar and specialist mentor for students with disabilities at the University of Cambridge. Her PhD was the first of its kind on the prose poetry of Frances Ponge, and she has an MA in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. Jane is fiercely brilliant. She is the editor of This Line Is Not for Turning, an anthology of contemporary British prose poetry. What she doesn't tell you in the bio is it has an amazing introduction, which she wrote. And more recently, she is the editor of the brilliant British prose poetry, The Poems Without Lines, from Palgrave Macmillan in 2018. Her poetry is astounding. She has collections with the Cinnamon Press, including Speaking Without Tongues and The Shared Surface. The Chalk Butterfly is forthcoming and it's a total knockout. And I think you're going to hear from her read from it today with her beautiful accent. So Jane, will you please read for us?
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you, everyone. I mean, it's such a treat reading with prose poets. It's actually surprisingly rare, and reading with prose poets from all over the world, it's just, yeah, it's wonderful. So thank you. And I'm glad Lit Balm is no longer new to me. So I'm actually going to kick off with not my poem, but a poem by my daughter, who wanted to be here this evening, but she's 7 and she's about 3 or 4 hours into sleep. So she said, could you read it for me, Mummy? So this is called I Am the Cloud Gardener by Sylvie. When the birds are on the railings and the sun is hiding in the sky, I blow wind to the string-like wires and it makes the birds fly high. As my rain trickles down, the worms come up to eat my ground. I am like a gardener, sowing the ground with snow, and as it fills the holes, all the children will know. When the cows lie with the sun behind the dark grey clouds, all my laughing raindrops form a storm in the sky. Sometimes I hear the birds chattering, they want my cloud to go astray. And then a swish of wind and I slowly fade away. Thank you, Sylvie.
She's amazing, Jane. She's such an amazing, amazing girl. So thank you. Tell her thank you.
I am the cloud gardener. That was my first point of jealousy. Terrible. So I'm going to read from my 3rd collection of prose poems, which should be coming out next year with Cinnamon Press, if my editor likes them. And it's the first collection I've written which initially didn't have a theme. I've been writing it over years, and then a theme sort of came about 2 years into it, I think, which was loosely around climate change and mental health and the effect that climate change was having on me, people I know, people I don't know. But it's kind of broadened out into other themes of sort of fragility of borders and identity and preservation and conservation more generally. So what we can and cannot preserve. And the image of the chalk butterfly really symbolizes the need to preserve the disappearing butterfly through art, museums and writing, but our failings to conserve the butterfly's many species in the world itself. But the book also celebrates and highlights the language of nature and how lucky, like artists, scientists, anyone really, we are to be able to borrow its rich vocabulary. So yeah, there's a lot of celebration as well. This first one is called Road Art. She'd landed face down on a chalk drawing of a butterfly. Beside her, the bicycle wheels span, hummed through her last impression of the world. The street was otherwise quiet and there were no known witnesses. In their absence, nature stepped up. The rooks at the crossroad decided to speak for everyone. Each turn is tight, cramped, and nobody wants to give way or slow down. A tree, one of the tallest in the area, all vertical branches and feathering leaves, agreed. Through every wise listening leaf agreed. Reticent at first, objects pitched in. The old red pillar box, diagonally across from her body, stood, reliably gaping in a dignified manner, and announced that its chipped iron aperture would soon receive letters and sympathy cards. The road sighed under a sharp gust. A stone edged from the curb onto the middle of the bar of a drain, clanged, then dropped into a tiny wet echo. A bird or more would have been startled, flown in any direction, and only resettled after the sirens. Cats, dogs, squirrels may twitch every so often in recollection. Insects darting to unusual vibrations perished or were injured in the process. Today, with no threat of rain, there remains just a chalk butterfly, its dust ever so slightly smudged at the left wing, where she'd kissed it with everything she had in her at the time. And this one is called The Wall and the Butterfly. And it's, do I say what it's about? I don't know. It's loosely about a section of Trump's wall. He does not feature here. The butterflies do. He closes his mouth ahead of the butterflies, holds his tongue before it takes flight and lands borderless. Hand over eyes, he protects himself from the air's impossible movements, stills his head mid-swarm. They've been told to build the wall here anyway, to ensure each and every hand that reaches for a tool, a machine, keeps going in spite of their native wings. But their skin is his story too, his touch their fall. He watches the way his flesh changes under the hurricane of the butterfly swarm, tattooed by pollen and the colours of wing dust and burnt journeys. In under a hammer blow, the sky clouds from insect to bird. Scissortail flycatchers, green jays, olive sparrows, and clay-coloured thrushes pile about the working frames, drown them in pounding flutters. A tree of great-tailed grackles explodes in applause. Over the troubled soil, zebra heliconians, giant orange sulphurs, queens and red-bordered pixies flicker at their marching feet. Unable to move, he opens his mouth and loses his tongue. To every brick, gun, and metal force, they raise their wings, state their place in the chain of us, what we eat, what we are, and what we could be inside the colours of open hands. And this one is called The Girl and the Octopus. And I guess it's sort of looking at how close and far our connections are with nature. And it takes the image of the little match girl and this extraordinary footage I saw of an octopus dreaming and how its colours change as it dreams. This is the story of the match girl and the dreaming octopus, where they meet but do not speak, and where they part but do not leave. A place where a tentacle finds its way around a hand, where the pictures that appear from a map-struck wall by a barefoot girl in snow twin the cinematic gleam and fade inside a sleeping mollusk. The deep sea holds its night breath and fixes around the light-changing phenomena, while the girl's visions begin away from her. Each lit match throws out a moving picture the length of a tiny wooden stalk. The cephalopod sleeps on, and we see her dream in fleck shades of gold, white, lavender, and black. Blooming patterns illuminate and fade accordingly. In one scene, a tentacle undoes like a time-lapse fern, stretching away from her third heart. In another, she is the seafloor, all coral, sand, and dancing kelp. Far inland, to the bright orange bomb of each flicker, brick walls around houses dissipate, and the girl stirs to a crackling hearth. A New Year's table, carefully laid with crystal, pearl, and silver. Another strike brings plum-stuffed goose with apple and a Christmas tree. Children reflected in glass ornaments, their faces rosy under the candle lights. Finally, her grandmother, smiling beside her bed again. Undoing the mollusk grip from her sleeping fingers, the old woman lifts the girl, balloon light towards the stars, where they meet but do not speak, where they touch and do not leave. Now this one called Taming the Sand is really about our sort of fight against time in terms of climate change, really, and how we're fighting against time to conserve our lives, at the same time that nature is pushed out of its own preservations or ability to preserve itself. I hope this isn't true, but this is what it feels like too often. The desert blows in at the door and rises to the table where the meal is set, reshapes itself around the room and fades each object to a grit-charged mist. Trees that stood sentry across the dunes are vanishing too, their scorched backs once resilient to the sun, curl comma-like, bowing closer to the earth through the year. The villagers construct low square walls of straw into the sand. They plan to grow these walls like seeds, repeat them without pardon over the land into a giant net. Square straw fractals to capture a pillaging storm, to measure the pattern of its outlawed dust and hold its stone fibres to account. Witnesses recall the way it wrecked the vines that grew the grapes that fell to raisins and kept the families. Illustrate for the jury how it covers dark field beds in yellow like an infertile pollen that insists upon the land breath by breath. How their exposed skin does what the fruit should, burns, shrinks into itself, dries out to a last gift. They processed from a desiccated sea. The tide less flow, more ebb with each season they fail to hold in their arms and harvest. The unwelcome wind awaits the verdict as their voices begin to disappear. Time pours out through itself and the jury is left weighing up what they heard and what they saw. Something about a land they could once predict, chasing its own ending. So I think I've got 3 more, just so you know where you are. And this is called Confiscated Wings, and it was written a long time ago when I was at school, back in the 80s. And it starts out as a poem about me being punished for giggling at something I shouldn't have done, and all the class went and played out on the hills, and I was stuck in the classroom. And my memory is that I was told to write about butterflies. This could be being convenient. This could be a convenient memory for the purpose of this book. But anyway, Confiscated Wings. The punishment was butterflies, staying at her desk and writing down everything she could find and remember from lessons about these dust-winged insects. Some have ears in their wings, she scribbled furiously, like monarchs, not moths. Hollow veins that carry sound, or a blood-like liquid that's cold and needs the sun to live. Wingtip to wingtip, an inch or two of fragile land. On the ground, you might mistake them for leaves. Their coloured scales on our fingers are damaged flight or death. Chalk-hill blue, swallowtail, peacock, monarch, red admiral, woodwhite, and the gatekeeper. Dwindling, endangered, extinct, rare. Staring at the rest of the paper, he thumbed down in front of her. She recalled their overlapping voices, exploding, then fading down the corridor. Sat up and looked through the window to where her class had fled the playground for the hill, parachuting the wind inside their jackets towards the barricade of teachers below. That's how she was caught, laughing too much to see where she was going. It was the pigeons that got her, winging full pelt towards the window, banging and sliding down the glass, toppling off the sill, expressionless and disappearing. Another one close behind. She understood now why he chose butterflies. Wings for flight and the freedom she'd miss on the hill, colours for wounds when crossing a glass line, and silence for mocking and breaking apart the way it's meant to travel, defy boundaries and survive. And this one, The Paper Piano, really is about what we can learn when reality is not available to us. I read an article about a boy who couldn't afford a piano, so he was completely determined to learn, and he made himself a piano out of paper. So this is called The Paper Piano. Too broke to play the real thing, the The boy gathered, cut, and arranged 88 pieces of scrap paper across a table. He drew black keys as they were meant to sit and define the white land in between. A stretched, flat place full of the promise of highs and lows. Then he watched others play on a screen, telescoped his gaze towards their dancing fingers, and listened to the notes as they rose and fell under skilled steps, racing, pouncing, hovering, and alighting across the ivory. After a while, he'd memorized and heard enough to graduate from screen to paper, to the real thing, and back to paper again. When he'd mastered the cutout version years later, he would sometimes make mistakes. I made a mistake, he'd say, no longer a boy. You can slip up on a torn piano, he'd come out laughing, fall the wrong side of the white space, hit the bum notes. Today, he's trained to hear mistakes as music, lest the hopeless thud of soft-tipped bone on wood with a cruel whisper of regret in return, and a sketch that sings off the table, fingers that scale and catch the wind, each time it fails to land in the same way. And finally, this is The Secret Life of Mud, and this was featured in the Westerly. Thank you, Cassandra. The Secret Life of Mud. And this really is about what happens when we try to conserve nature, when we remove it from nature. Eyes to the ground, backs to the sky. In London, a new rise of searchers. Their eyes only approach less the keen blunting nose of a machine than a slow scour of land. An English waltz of pick up and burrow in the short-term dark of a working pocket. Meet the mudlarks, roaming and combing the foreshore in the quiet margin of the river's grave. They are the new bone grubbers, the scavengers, sewer hunters by choice. With permits and skills, they rehome the stuff of chance, retell the stone's flight, the story of metal, cloth, or leather, caught in some bend of wind and planted along the water road. Once found and recorded, each object is cleaned and resettled behind glass in the mapped out belly of a museum. The clay pipes, toy stone men on horses, mint face coins from 1,000,000 hands ago, boots whose tread and crease have stepped through 500 years, and spoons from the mouths of every age, are given the chance to speak again. And this is what we might hear them say. Thanks to the mud, we lived in the dark, and thanks to the air, we died in the light. And on that note, I will finish. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jane. What an amazing way to end the feature. Such a brilliant collection of poetry, so beautifully read. And thank you for staying up very late into your evening, Jane, for that. And thank wonderful Sylvie for her poem too. So can we have a final round of applause for Rodger, Holly, Paul, and Jane, who gave us their amazing time at Lit Balm. But don't go anywhere, because Jonathan Penton is going to run an amazing open mic. Isn't that right, Jonathan?
That's
Just
me.
a short one.
Yes, let's do that. So for the past several sessions, we've been having a variety of new people in the open mic, a variety of people who have never come before and were reading for the first time, while our regulars waited patiently to get another chance. So let's hear from our regulars tonight. First up is Cindy Hochman. Cindy, let me see, did I unmute you? Let me try that again. Ask to unmute.
Unmute. There I go. I'm going to read a prose poem. I think that's appropriate. I'm excited about this one because for 9 years I've been trying to get into the Great Weather for Media anthology, and for 9 years they've turned me down. This week I got an acceptance from them. And no one here is from Great Weather for Media, so I'm safe reading the poem. It's called My Baby Crawls. My baby crawls into the pantry, searching for things. Her ragdoll cat, a fresh white linen diaper, love, and nourishment. That's what babies do. She eats a few Cheerios that have spilled out of the giant yellow box that holds nothing but O's. She eats a few sugar ants that are slogging their way to building a sacred mountain of dirt. And just like those busy builders, my baby follows her own lofty trail. She is a colony unto herself. Her head is full of magpies, blackbirds, robins, and wrens, though she doesn't yet have words for the birds she observes through an unfettered aviary, the not yet hatched nest of her sweet mind. All of this is going on while I, her mother, am wielding a quill and doting on anecdotes, narratives, memoirs, and little white lies. Little white lie number 1. It's a nondescript black ballpoint pen, not a quill. Little white lie number 2. There's not a single ant in the pantry. Little white lie number 3. I don't really have a baby. Thank you.
Wonderful, Cindy.
Thanks.
But if you did, she'd have a head full of birds, yes? All right, next up is another regular, the wonderful Bob Heeman. Bob, will you read a poem for us tonight?
Sure. And this is from my information series of prose poems, keeping with the evening. Information. One story ends with fire, or with water, or with a man falling through the air. Another ends with a woman digging in the earth, searching for a different way for the story to end. Each time a man appears, he is a different man, wearing a different suit of clothes. Each time a woman enters, she is the same woman, always asking the same question over and over again. Sometimes an animal is required to end the story in an appropriate way. Thank you.
Outstanding, Bob.
Thanks.
Very cool. All right, let's hear from a man who is at all the Zoom readings, I do believe. See him everywhere. John Wezek, will you read for us tonight?
Absolutely, thank you. And boy, it's really great to be a regular. This is a poem about academia called Or Perish. Solving one integral stands between you and a satisfied life. You'll be a professor in a cashmere sweater, have an intelligent, capable woman on your arm, and drive an antique sports car because genius is a license to be eccentric. How wonderful when the best minds pause to hear your thoughts and wide-eyed students say you make science fascinating. You open a thick book of integral tables, search hundreds of pages and find only the sinking feeling that your future townhouse with its pre-Columbian artifacts, season tickets to the theater and vacations in the south of France are getting more and more unlikely. You change variables, but each X transformed to you becomes another low-paid temporary postdoc. You move to more desolate cities, leaving friends behind to work on increasingly mind-numbing, desperate projects. Your lover abandons you, aching for a human touch. You sleep alone in a noisy one-bedroom apartment. Your hand cramps after filling pages with letters, symbols, and eraser smudges. When you try integrating by parts, it becomes clear that after years of high-tech serfdom, you'll have only these useless pages, and internet search traps you in the quicksand of mathematical irrelevance. You curse the teachers who encouraged you. The tension in your shoulders could snap a steel cable. Your future, written in pencil, a future of frayed sweatshirts, cheap shoes, bill collectors, a subterranean credit score, and tasteless beer in rundown bars.
All right, John, that was fantastic. So what is the difference between an academic and a bohemian then?
Yeah, I don't know, but if your tenure depends on it, you can always write a computer program to integrate a function numerically.
Okay, I'll try that.
Makes sense. I know this guy who actually number crunches the stock exchange every single day. He claims to have the perfect algorithm. It kind of reminds me of that in a way. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining us.
We still want to hear from Mike Folds real quick.
Okay, sure.
Let's see, ask unmute, Mike.
Hello all, and thanks for the opportunity. I would like to, I published a magazine called Ragazine online for about 15 years. I think Mark Vincennes had something in it at one time, maybe a couple years ago. We stopped publishing in 2019, but the archives are still online, and I'd like to invite you all to have a look and see what's there, because we don't know how long it's going to be up. But thank you, John. The poem I'm going to read is called Original Sin. I wrote it, and then I ran across an image in the Eye of Photography magazine, which is a French photography magazine. It's not called Eye of Photography, it's World de la Photographie. But anyway, it's a really beautiful picture by Charles Jourdan, and it's called Diana and the Huntress, and it's, I don't know if you can see it, but let me try to show it to you. Can anyone see that? So anyway, it's a woman and a dog on a beach. I wrote the poem, and then I saw the picture, and they seemed to match pretty well, so I put them together. But to be old and able to appreciate youthful indiscretion, those artful moments of excitement and delivery from the future and the past while having a blast. Those mountains of conformance exploding into bits of memories, lost in the instants it took to rip them rock from mound. Or on a simple whim, the driving force behind invention and consequence, the original sin clad in agnostic garb for whomever delights in putting them on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mark, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say thank you for this amazing show. Thank you for tuning in from Florida, New Orleans, Canberra, Australia, and Cambridge, UK. Thank you, Holly, Rodger, Paul, and Jane. It was amazing. Once again, next time, which is March 27, we have Lynn Hegenian, Jeff Friedman, Nin Andrews, and Jivina Orlovsky, and I'm guessing it's going to be fairly prose poetry oriented as well. So if you guys are interested in that, please drop by for that for sure. And the one after that is April 10 with Singapore connected authors, including Rachel Blau Duplessis, Marilyn Tan, George Sitches, and Ranjit Hoskote, with guest MC Alvin Pang live from Singapore. Thank you guys so much for this wonderful show. I'm happy to throw the mic around. Cassandra, would you like to say a last word?
He's just putting the pressure on me because every week I throw to him for like a final philosophical word. No, nothing special, just that I love having all of my friends in the room, and that includes the regulars, and it includes the feature today. Prose poetry is near and dear to my heart, so thank you for highlighting it so beautifully.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you for bringing it to us, folks.
You know, Ted Dieterman's been driving all this time.
He has.
Yeah, I noticed that.
He listens in every week as well, driving or in the shower, wherever he is, you know?
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Love, poetry, and health. And see you next time. Take care, guys.
Very much. That was wonderful. Thank you. That was an honor.
Thank you all. I enjoyed it, and really appreciated having a chance to read with Jane and Paul and Holly, and hope to see you all again somewhere. And maybe in New Orleans. You should all come to New Orleans to the festival if you can.
Yeah, I hope
And,
so. That would be wonderful.
yeah, I think
That
it's,
sounds like a dream.
well, I think next year will happen. I'm pretty sure, don't you think? I think we'll
Yeah,
be,
I think so. Yeah.
I think it'll be possible. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be with all of you, and thank you all to Lit Balm.
Thank you. Very inspiring.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night,
Okay.
everybody.
Night.
Good night.
See you again. Bye. Thank you.